Hello, I'm Dr. Manuel G. Saldivar. I'm a cognitive psychologist and a university faculty member. On this channel, I focus on ideas and concepts that will help you become more successful as a college student. Please join me for today's episode. An important thing you need to consider as a new college student is, what does learning mean to you as a college student? This may seem like an obvious question, but it's actually not. Researchers who study learning divide students into two major categories. Some students are performers, and a performer-oriented student thinks of school, of college, as a performance, hence the name. What do we mean by this? A student who is a performer is very concerned with certain motions or behaviors that are obvious to other people. A performer-oriented student is really big on being perceived to be a good student, to have other people see him or her as a good student. So they view the performance of learning as requiring things like going to class, sitting quietly, looking up at the professor, having a pen and paper or a laptop in front of them to take notes. But the problem with this performer orientation is that it also tends to be very focused on grades as the major outcome or measurement of the learning process. Now, of course, grades are very important to college students. Among other things, if you have financial aid or a scholarship, typically you have to have a minimum GPA, a minimum grade point average, in order to keep your financial aid or your scholarship. Certainly, every college or university has a minimum GPA that's required in order to remain enrolled as a student. So if your grades are too low, you're not allowed to continue attending the college or university. So yes, grades have a place, but at the end of the day, a grade is just a letter or a number on your transcript. A grade doesn't necessarily reflect what you are actually learning, what you're actually taking from your education. This brings us to another variety of students who are learners. Learner-oriented students, hence the name, really care about learning. They really want to develop a true understanding of the material that they're being presented in class, they're encountering in their readings and other academic activities. If you're a learner, yes, grades will be important to you, the way they should be for the reasons I've just described. But what you're really going to focus on, what's really going to be most important to you, is that you're learning, that you're taking away meaning from the things you're studying in school. This can often be a challenging thing for students, especially if you come into college used to focusing really on grades. But the thing is, if you're learning to be a nurse, if you're learning to be an engineer, if you're learning to be an accountant, or whatever profession it is that you want to enter once you finish college, you have to bear in mind that someday someone is going to hire you to be a nurse or an engineer or an accountant or whatever your field is. And at that time, you will have to actually show that you know what you're doing. You'll have to actually do the work. Whatever your grades are, and again, as I've said many times, good grades are important for various reasons. But fundamentally, you will need to be able to actually do nursing, to do engineering, to do accounting. And whatever your grades are, they're not going to matter when you're actually sitting there having your boss looking at you, expecting you to do work. So you want to have a learner orientation. You want to focus on making sure you're actually taking away real meaning, real understanding from the stuff you're doing as a college student, as opposed to focusing exclusively on what your grades are. Because again, your grades will not be the sole measure of what you're actually taking away from the college experience. Related to this, and one of the reasons why I think many students have this performer orientation, is what I call the brute force approach to studying. This brute force approach is the approach to studying, the way of thinking about school that, in my experience and from the research that I've done, 90% of college students, if not more, have this perspective when they come into college. So what do I mean by this brute force approach? This is the approach where, let's say, you have a test coming up in 2 weeks in your history class, and it's going to be over 5 chapters. So your approach to studying for that class is to read, reread, 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 and so on and so on. So let's say that, again, that test in your history class is over 5 chapters. So you start reading the first chapter, you read it from the beginning to the end. And then once you finish that chapter, you go to the next one, you read that from beginning to end, and then the next chapter, and the one after that, and then finally the 5th chapter. And once you finish the 5th chapter, then you go back to the first chapter of the 5 and reread it again, and so on and so on and so on. Now, there are a number of problems with this approach, and I'll discuss this further in subsequent videos, but the point I want to make here is why this brute force approach takes a lot of time and effort, obviously, but is not necessarily the most effective. It's not the most effective approach because, if you think about it, the readings you have, let's say textbook chapters or articles, not every page, not every word is necessarily going to be of equal importance. There will be some ideas in a chapter in a reading that your professor may consider to be more important, more central to the material, to the ideas that you're trying to learn. There may be, in any given book chapter, some sections that have review questions or diagrams or other materials that are not really important to understanding the material. In other words, in a typical textbook chapter, let's say, that might be 40 pages long, you might really only have 28 or 30 or 32 pages of stuff that actually relates to the topic. Those other several pages are, as I said, review questions or diagrams, photographs that you don't really have to worry about. So right there, you have evidence or proof that not every page is of equal importance in a particular chapter. Not every page of a reading is of equal importance. Sorry for the interruption, but if you're enjoying this video, please like, subscribe, and click on the bell icon for notifications. So this suggests that treating every page of every reading as being equally important is just not an efficient use of your time. As a student, you can do better than the brute force approach. The number one technique that I recommend to my students, and again, this is not just my experience, but we have a lot of evidence that visual note-taking is a much more effective and efficient approach to studying than the brute force approach. Visual note-taking means reading material, paying attention in class, but taking that information and instead of letting it sit on the page as words on paper, you actually break those ideas apart and put them back together in visual representations, in diagrams and charts that will help you learn more quickly while still learning. You can see my episode 7 of this video series for more information on visual note-taking. So, to review our discussion in this episode, the topic was changing how you learn. I encourage you to think about how you see learning in college. What is the purpose of learning in college? And not surprisingly, I suggest to you that the purpose of college is learning, real learning, not just memorization, not just focusing on what your grades are. The brute force approach that many students bring into college from high school has a number of problems associated with it, which I described. And you can do better than the brute force approach. Visual note-taking is one good example of this. For more information, again, on visual note-taking, watch the next episode in this video series. I also have other videos on my YouTube channel looking at related topics, such as learning inside and outside of class, how to be an effective listener and an effective reader. Those videos might also help you with additional tips on being successful. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll click on the thumbs up icon below. And if you really enjoyed it, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications by clicking on the bell icon. YouTube will notify you of future videos added to this channel. Remember, college success is challenging. It takes work and effort, but it is certainly within your grasp. Good luck.